Happy New Year and welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show. It is officially 2021. We are going to begin 74 years ago. Okay. On March 1st, 1947, a 47-year-old American businessman named Eugene LeBar arrived in New York City after traveling by bus from Mexico City. New York was not his final destination, but he was actually on his way to the state of Maine. But he was actually feeling sick, so he decided to halt all further travel and checked in at a hotel with his wife. After looking around the enormous city of New York, Mr. LeBar went straight to bed that night. He was exhausted. He had a headache as well as pain in the back of his neck. Things were not going well for him. By March 5th, he was admitted to Bellevue Hospital with a 105-degree fever and also an odd-looking rash on his face and hands. 3 days later, Eugene LeBar was transferred to a different hospital. This hospital was Willard Park, New York City's communicable disease hospital, and when he arrived, doctors contemplated about several diagnoses they could use to treat him. But that ultimately failed, and unfortunately, by March 10th, Eugene LeBar was dead. Subsequently, more patients were admitted to Willard Parker because they too began experiencing symptoms as Mr. LeBar did. The first patient was a 22-month-old baby from the Bronx. Then there was a 27-year-old from Harlem, and after that, a 30-month-old toddler, and patients continued coming in. The doctors initially thought that they were dealing with chickenpox, but the rashes on the patients essentially it appeared to be something different. There was really some concern about the spontaneous, continuing influx of patients at Willard Parker Hospital. So the doctors there essentially sent some information to the U.S. Army Medical School Laboratory about this. Then on April 4th, those doctors received their results, and it was indeed definitely not chickenpox, it was smallpox. Now, this disease hadn't been seen in New York City before the war transpired, so where could this have come from? That then led doctors back to the original patient, which was Mr. Eugene LeBar, the first patient to ever experience those symptoms. They just didn't know at the time that it was smallpox. The health commissioner at the time in New York City was Dr. Israel Weinstein, who had been only employed for 10 months. This meant that he had something big and also new on his hands. Josh Florio and Ozzie Shapiro reported at the New York Times about this remarkable piece about how 6 million New Yorkers got vaccinated in less than a month. They report, quote, "He'd been a child on the Lower East Side when a smallpox outbreak brought the city to its knees in the early 1900s, killing 720 New Yorkers in a 2-year period. Now he is both a medical doctor and also a scientist. He had earned a doctorate from New York University along with a PhD and an MD from Columbia." End quote. So Dr. Weinstein is very intelligent and also a very studious person, and he has also experienced an outbreak like this before in his childhood. And when he received those lab results, he knew exactly what he was up against. Smallpox wasn't just this newly formed, highly contagious and lethal disease. This had been around for thousands of years. Smallpox is easily transmissible because all you have to do to contract it is for someone to cough, sneeze, or touch something or someone. Upon contracting it in a short number of days before you develop a fever, you'll experience pain, nausea, fever, and also aches. After that, this is from the New York Times about what happens next. Quote, "A rash appears on the face and soon covers the body, sprouting into fluid-filled pustules. 3 out of 10 cases are fatal. Those who survive are often deeply scarred, blind, or both." End quote. So yes, as I said, this is incredibly lethal and horrible. And so when Dr. Weinstein received those lab results on Good Friday, which was on April 4th, he decided to waste no time because in 2 days, there was the scheduled annual Easter parade, which could be a public health nightmare if he didn't take action in terms of people gathering around, coughing and sneezing. So he knew that there was only one thing that could conceivably resolve this issue. And so that was a vaccine. And at 2 o'clock that day, Dr. Weinstein held a news conference urging all New Yorkers to get vaccinated immediately, even if they had already received the vaccine as a child. Dr. Weinstein was being extremely earnest here. He was not joking around. For those who had received them as a child, he said that they potentially could have lost their immunity to the virus. Therefore, in order to prevent being reinfected, getting vaccinated was 100% worth it. Back then, the vaccination process was not as meticulous as it is now. So the vaccine, which was for public use could potentially cause rare but dangerous side effects. According to the New York Times, if people had skin conditions or weakened immune systems, they may be likely to experience those side effects. When there was great public skepticism about taking this vaccine, Dr. Weinstein delivered coherent, consistent, and transparent messages on the radio.
We cannot guarantee that there have not been other cases, because not every case of smallpox, or for that matter of any disease, represents the classic or textbook picture. They vary in degree. Now, there very well may have been certain mild cases that have gone about and have not been diagnosed. It's the carrier, the person who carries the organism on his clothes or on his body, or the person who has a mild attack of the disease, who is the dangerous one. And remember that the person who has a mild attack can give it to one who is unprotected, and that person get it in all its severity. If you gamble with your health and with your life, you are very foolhardy. There is a definite danger as long as people in the city are unprotected. For your own sake, and for that of your families and friends, please don't take a chance. Be vaccinated tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to a special address by Dr. Israel Weinstein, Health Commissioner of the City of New York.
Vaccination is the sure preventative against smallpox.
After Dr. Weinstein continued delivering those pivotal, convincing public health messages to convince the public about taking the vaccine, posters like this began appearing around the city. Quote, "Be safe, be sure, get vaccinated," end quote. Those coherent, consistent, and very informative, transparent public health messages from Dr. Israel Weinstein encouraged more people to get vaccinated, and the lines were extremely long. Those lines were so long that they stretched around buildings after buildings, and it kept going. You can search up right now on your phone or on your device, 1947 New York vaccine lines. And just look at the pictures. This is what happened when there was a shortage of vaccines. The New York Times writes, quote, "The municipal stockpile contained nowhere near enough to vaccinate all the city's 7.8 million residents. With the full cooperation of Mayor William O'Dwyer, Dr. Weinstein secured 250,000 units of vaccines from the Naval Medical Supply Depot in Brooklyn. He had 780,000 doses flown in from military bases in California and Missouri. He purchased an additional 2 million from private manufacturers, and then he ordered more. He directed his Bureau of Laboratories to convert its bulk supplies into single-dose units, and he began a tracing program to locate and vaccinate those who had been in contact with the victims," end quote. The New York Times describes this 1947 vaccine rollout as, quote, "remarkably swift and uncomplicated," end quote. New Yorkers stood in lines for long hours, whether it was cold or raining. They were determined to receive this vaccine. In front of news cameras, Dr. Weinstein vaccinated the mayor of New York City himself, William O'Dwyer, and it made big news headlines when President Harry S. Truman flew out to New York to roll up his sleeve and receive the vaccine as well. People were so thrilled to receive this vaccine back then that ordinary people started volunteering to assist in delivering the vaccines. 8 doses were administered per minute, and 889,000 students got vaccinated. In just the first 2 weeks of this vaccine rollout, 5 million New Yorkers were vaccinated against smallpox. In the middle of April, when the city's stockpile experienced another shortage, the mayor ordered an emergency meeting of all drug company representatives and threatened to publicly ridicule them if they didn't move faster. Upon hearing the news, they were like, "Okay, yes, sir." And then within 48 hours, 1 million more doses had arrived and were ready. In early May of 1947, after 47-year-old Eugene Labar died from smallpox, Dr. Weinstein announced that it was over and this disease had passed. Dr. Weinstein would go on to write in the American Journal of Public Health later that year about this experience. He wrote, quote, In a period of less than a month, 6,350,000 people were vaccinated in New York City. Never before had so many people been vaccinated in such a city and on such short notice. End quote. The result of that smallpox outbreak in New York in 1947 was 12 cases and 2 deaths. Dr. Weinstein ultimately resigned in November of 1947, which was 7 months after the smallpox outbreak. But his work, guidance, transparency, and informative delivery of information, also his ability to get the outbreak immediately under control by vaccinations, leaves behind a blueprint for how to prevent further spread of an infectious disease in an enormous city like New York. The first coronavirus case to be diagnosed here in the United States was on January 21st last year. As the pandemic exacerbated, President Trump claimed that a vaccine rollout was on its way. He also politicized the process. Then, when the vaccine finally came out, the president himself was thinking about jumping the line. Then he decided to step back. It appeared that the White House is right now planning a rushed effort to encourage Americans to take the vaccine. Apparently, they did not plan for that. So here we are, 1 year later. The federal government has failed again. And remember when the Trump administration promised 20 million Americans vaccinated by the end of December? Maybe? Well, that is not the case. As of today, more than 3 million Americans have been vaccinated against the coronavirus. We are not even close to 20 million. Because of the Trump administration's failed effort on this process, more people will die, and that's just enraging. Yesterday, the United States surpassed 20 million coronavirus cases, the most in the world. We have been number 1 for a while now, and that is not good. Right now, more than 358,000 Americans are dead. We are getting closer and closer to 350,000, another grim, solemn milestone. According to the COVID-19 Tracking Project, more than 125,000 Americans are currently hospitalized. When Dr. Israel Weinstein managed the smallpox outbreak in New York in 1947, that was not just a city. That was just a city. We are dealing today with a nation. However, that vaccine rollout, as the New York Times describes it, yes, it was effective, but as they put it, it was also, quote, remarkably swift and uncomplicated, end quote. I wish I could say the same thing about today, but not the case. Last year, Tucker Carlson on Fox News encouraged people to be skeptical about the vaccine and don't bother taking it. Also, the Republicans decided it'd be a great idea to invite a vaccine skeptic to Congress to testify about the effectiveness of the vaccine. Does this really work? So this is what's happening in today's environment. Of course, in 1947, that was not the case because with Dr. Weinstein, it was not the case. His messages were consistent, coherent, informative, and transparent. Today, if you're thinking about taking the vaccine, it depends on which news network you're watching. Lisa Sherman, the president of the Ad Council, told the New York Times, quote, in today's environment, we're dealing with a highly fragmented media. We'll be relying on micro-influencers who are the trusted voices, end quote. Dr. Erwin Redlener, director of the Pandemic Resource and Response Initiative at Columbia University's Earth Institute, also an advisor to New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio on emergency response, said, quote, we've learned that politics is poison to public health initiative, especially during a crisis. Honesty and straightforward, clear messaging are absolutely critical, end quote. I want to apologize if you hear any fireworks in the background. I'm sitting directly by my window, which in podcast terms is probably not the smart choice. Probably better to sit in your closet or something with... Anyway, you get the concept. When Dr. Erwin Redlener was asked if the city could come close to what Dr. Weinstein managed to accomplish, he said, quote, it's almost inconceivable that we're going to be able to do something as similar as rapidly and as effectively, end quote. Yesterday, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio pledged to vaccinate 1 million New York City residents by the end of this month. That is awesome, and we will see what ultimately happens. President-elect Joe Biden has ultimately made a similar optimistic promise, promising to vaccinate 100 million Americans in his first 100 days. That too is awesome and absolutely achievable, but we will see. The federal government has unquestionably failed on this vaccine rollout, and this will have some very, very unfortunate ramifications for us as a nation in terms of containing this outbreak. And even with the vaccine, it's going to take a while to contain this virus and to get this under control. Dr. Leanna Wynn writes on Twitter, quote, 20 million vaccinations were promised until recently. Before that, 100 million. We need to ramp up ASAP. We need this. We knew this was going to be hard, but Americans have done hard things before, end quote. According to the Washington Post, if the United States continues at its current rate, it will take 10 years to vaccinate 80% of Americans. So this vaccine rollout isn't going as smoothly as 1947, but instead, the current situation is terrible. This was reporting from NBC Nightly News last Thursday.
In Florida, those 65 and older and healthcare workers exasperated by the vaccine rollout here. Those who are eligible for the first round of shots waiting up to 8 hours in first come, first served lines.
I blame our whole government. I mean, I totally blame our government that this is not what it should be.
I did not expect to be sitting here since 3:45 this morning.
In Florida, 1 in 5 of this state's 21 million residents is 65 or older. The demand for vaccines overwhelming. Officials in Fort Myers today defending their plan of first come, first served.
Could it be more efficient? You betcha. We're the first to admit that. It gets better every day, and it's going to be better next week than it was this week.
Taking appointments with its own set of problems. In Fort Lauderdale, when Broward Health announced anyone 65 or older could get a shot, the phone lines crashed. The problem nationwide. In Tennessee today, a miles-long traffic jam for people waiting for a vaccine. State officials blame the federal government. Operation Warp Speed, past responsibility of administering the vaccine to state and local health departments, which are underfunded and, for the last 9 months, have been focused on getting people tested for the virus. The former commissioner of health in New Jersey.
If we're not able to get through that first phase as fast as possible, that's going to push the whole chain down in terms of time. And as we're seeing, every day means lives, thousands of lives.
And in Wisconsin, a pharmacist fired and arrested tonight after allegations of intentionally contaminating 500 doses of the vaccine by taking the vials out of a refrigerator. Tonight in Florida, a member of the state cabinet is calling on the governor to call in the National Guard to take over vaccine distribution to fix the chaos. So far, no indication that will happen.
That was reporting from NBC Nightly News. This was an article by Aaron Shoemaker at ABC News on Thursday. Quote, long lines for COVID-19 vaccines build in Florida, Tennessee, and Puerto Rico. The article continues, quote, as the United States' uneven vaccine rollout continues, lines for vaccination have begun to form in places such as Tennessee, Florida, and Puerto Rico. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, dozens of cars queued up Thursday morning, the first day that those 75 and older were eligible to get vaccinated for COVID-19. Just after 10 a.m., the county health department issued a notice on Twitter asking those farther back in the line to leave and come back another time. In Puerto Rico, they're also having some issues as well. This was the headline at the Miami Herald on Tuesday, quote, medical workers in Puerto Rico have been sleeping outside to get COVID-19 vaccine, end quote. One healthcare worker expressed some enragement in her statements, in this statement saying, quote, they said there was a plan, but where is the plan? I am skeptical of what the government says, and after Hurricane Maria, even more. Since when do they know that the vaccines are coming? Why was there no plan? End quote. On top of this, Puerto Rico is also seeing an exponential increase in new coronavirus cases, so you can tell that there was enragement and mystification about this process. Also, the Trump administration is now planning to encourage Americans to take the vaccine. We are in a terrible position right now, and the vaccine rollout is not starting off so well. This was the headline at the Post and Courier yesterday, quote, race to vaccinate millions off to slow, messy start, end quote. Hopefully this does improve, and while the vaccines here are here and are still arriving, the current coronavirus situation is just getting worse. According to the New York Times, the new highly contagious COVID-19 variant has been discovered in more than 32 countries. Here in the United States, the COVID-19 variant initially found in the United Kingdom has been discovered in reportedly 3 states: California, Colorado, and Florida. Today, California continues to report more than just high records of new coronavirus cases, and they are continuing to set records. California Public Health issued a statement on Twitter on New Year's Eve saying, quote, "Gathering this New Year's Eve could have devastating consequences for our hospital systems. We need to do all that we can to stop California from experiencing a surge on top of a surge. Hashtag stop the surge." End quote. According to CNN, quote, "Doctors in Santa Clara, California are treating some critically ill patients in the emergency room as there are just no spots in intensive care units. Quote, often the only time when we can move someone in a COVID unit when essentially a COVID patient dies." According to Dr. Marco Randazzo, an emergency room physician, who said this on Thursday at a news conference. There are also reports that doctors in California, doctors and nurses are having to put people in the emergency room, having to put them in hallways, also in gift shops. On New Year's Eve here in South Carolina, the Post and Courier reported statewide ICU beds are at 81% capacity. We are also seeing an exponential increase in coronavirus cases, and our state's positivity rate is at 31.2%. Yesterday, this was the headline at the Post and Courier, quote, "State approaches 5,000 confirmed coronavirus deaths. More than 3,000 new coronavirus cases as 31.2% positivity rate reported," end quote. In Alabama, more than a third of their COVID cases came in December. The state public health director, Scott Harris, said, quote, "We are going to see even worse numbers," end quote. Today, they reported more than 3,000 new coronavirus cases as hospitals are now facing a doomsday scenario. In Georgia, New Year's has brought a surge of new coronavirus cases in that state. The mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, Keisha Lance Bottoms, is now encouraging residents to start wearing a mask and just continue wearing a mask as cases are surging there. Georgia is now closing in on 10,000 coronavirus deaths as the state is getting ready to vote in one of the most critical elections in Senate American history. We're going to have more reporting on that later on. Today in Texas, the Dallas Morning News had this yesterday in Texas, the Dallas Morning News had this headline, quote, "Texas reports 16,027 new COVID-19 cases as hospitals hit record for 5th consecutive day," end quote. So that's just the current situation in 5 states. I mean, I could go on. Cases are continuing to rise exponentially, and so are hospitalizations. As the U.S. death toll continues to rise, the incoming Biden administration, or should I say the Biden transition team until we get to that point, January 20th, the Biden transition team said that they will hold a vigil for those who have lost their lives from the coronavirus. The vigil will be held on January 19th, one day before the inauguration. These are difficult times right now, and the pandemic has been transpiring for a year now. Well, when we get to January 21st, it'll officially be a year. The leadership from the Trump administration on the coronavirus pandemic response has been a cataclysmic failure. Now, with weeks left in office and cases and deaths and hospitalizations rising, they have failed another key test, and that is this vaccine rollout. And that is not only deadly, but that's enraging. But this is where we are right now. We are now officially 12 months into this crisis, and the Trump administration is continuing to fail at the highest levels of the federal government. More than 348,000 Americans are dead. We are inching closer and closer to 350,000. The incoming Biden administration, which will officially be on January 20th, is announcing that they will be holding a vigil for those who lost their lives on January 19th. We'll be right back.
Hi, Grandma. At a time when we're asked to sacrifice, we step up to do our part. On the home front, on the front lines, to lend a helping hand and hold each other up. We are resilient, vigilant, and we'll get through this because we're better together, even if we're a little farther apart.
Major headline just days before Georgia's 2 Senate runoff elections. Control of the Senate at stake. Republican Senator David Perdue going into quarantine after being exposed to COVID-19. Nearly 3 million people already voting early in person or by mail. Here's ABC's Alex Brachet.
Tonight, Georgia Republican Senator David Perdue sidelined ahead of that crucial runoff that will determine control of the U.S. Senate after coming into close contact with someone on his campaign who tested positive for COVID-19. His team saying Perdue and his wife are quarantining, and both the senator and his wife tested negative today. Perdue on the trail just yesterday.
What I'm here doing is trying to fight for the people of Georgia.
The 71-year-old senator is facing a tough challenge from Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff.
The whole country is watching Georgia voters to see what we will do at this historic moment.
Already, nearly 3 million Georgians have voted early, some reporting wait times up to 4 hours. The other Republican senator trying to keep her seat, Senator Kelly Loeffler, leaving the door open to joining a large number of House Republicans and Missouri Senator Josh Hawley's efforts to challenge the Electoral College results, which Congress is set to certify next week.
Look, everything's on the table right now.
And Tom, Perdue was set to join Loeffler at a rally on Monday, the day before Election Day, headlined by President Trump. And now that's in jeopardy. Tom?
Alex Brachet covering everything out of Georgia for us tonight. Alex, thank you for that.
That was reporting from ABC News on Thursday, December 31st. Those Georgia Senate runoffs are absolutely crucial when it comes to who will control the U.S. Senate this year. This will also affect if the incoming Biden administration will really get to accomplish anything in terms of legislation. President Trump has continued spreading conspiracy theories about those runoffs, and Trump supporters are certainly following along with it. There are certainly high stakes in this runoff. Charles Bullock, a political scientist at the University of Georgia, said, quote, he told Bloomberg News, quote, "Something like this has never happened before and probably never will again. 2 seats from one state in one election that will decide Senate control, it's just unprecedented," end quote. For most people, these Georgia Senate runoffs are not just about putting Democrats back in power and making Mitch McConnell the Senate minority leader again. It's more than that. It's about feeding their children, not having to lose sleep over financial destitution or fear of eviction. These seats are absolutely crucial. And as a nation, this is what we're going through right now. Coronavirus cases, deaths, and hospitalizations rising exponentially. But we're also experiencing this.
As the political sparring continues, millions of Americans remain in need. My colleague Gadi Schwartz met some of them as they waited in a long line of cars for food in the Los Angeles area today. During a live report on MSNBC's, Gadi's reaction to one couple's story was one most of us could identify with.
This food that you guys are picking up today, ¿para qué es?
Para la cena de Navidad.
He says that the food that they're picking up here is for their Christmas meal. Bueno, gracias para compartir tu historia. Gracias. This is just one of the stories. I mean, you've got a parking lot filled with people. They're going to be picking up their meals, picking up meals for Christmas. Sorry.
It absolutely tears your heart out. Gadi has more now on the struggles hitting home for far too many families this holiday.
At any given food drive, there's always someone at the front of the line. And today in Santa Monica, it was Maria and Saturnino Villegas who showed up 3 hours early. Like so many others, Saturnino lost his job at a restaurant.
He says that they had a little bit of savings and now they're going around and they're looking for cans and bottles to recycle.
And as these lines wind all across the country, inside cars are families that never thought they'd be waiting for food donations 2 days before Christmas.
Coming from last year, going to restaurants on a regular basis and living life to the fullest, it definitely was a shock to us.
The Los Angeles Regional Food Bank has given out 120 million meals since the pandemic began. But when an estimated 1 in 4 people have been food insecure here during the pandemic, it's still not enough.
The food bank's distribution has increased by 145% since the pandemic hit, and we're not necessarily reaching everyone who needs help.
And as the Viegas receive their food, they tell us what volunteers hear again and again. They plan on sharing this blessing with others in their community that need it too. Gotti Schwartz, NBC News, Santa Monica.
That was reporting from NBC Nightly News just the day before Christmas Eve. Those were people in food lines sitting in their cars waiting to receive food for their Christmas meal. Earlier this week, a $2,000 stimulus check that was supported by President Trump and Democrats failed in the United States Senate, but it did pass the House. It failed by the United States Senate because Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked it. That's how powerful he is in the Senate. And Republicans hold a 50-seat majority right now. If Republicans win one of those seats in Georgia or both of them, they retain power. And that's why this runoff election is so pivotal for most people. However, if the Democrats win both seats, it will be a tie between the Republicans. It'll be a 50-50 tie. And so if that happens, then Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, which will be sworn in on January 20th, she'll be the vice president at the time, and she'll be sort of like the presiding vote in the United States Senate, meaning if there's any tie, her vote would break that tie, effectively flipping control of the United States Senate. If the Republicans win both races, they can continue blocking stimulus checks and demanding protections for social media companies. They can also block the confirmations of soon-to-come President Joe Biden's cabinet members, judicial nominees, and also key national security members. So this wouldn't be new because Senator Mitch McConnell did this under the Obama administration, saying that he would make him a one-term president. That was his goal. So as I said, these Georgia Senate runoffs are crucial. They are high stakes here in this race. Yesterday, President Trump referred to the Georgia Senate races as, quote, illegal and invalid, end quote, which is not true, but this definitely complicates things for the two incumbent Republican senators in Georgia. President Trump, in the past, has threatened the governor of, not threatened, but has pressured the governor of Georgia to cancel these runoffs, which he can't do. But the president floating all these conspiracy theories and floating all this stuff about the Georgia Senate runoffs secretly already being decided and being illegal and invalid. I don't know how this is going to help the incumbent Republican senators in that race if they want to retain power in the U.S. Senate. But we will see what happens. Election day in Georgia is on Tuesday, January 5th. Eyes open. Keep an eye on this race. We've got more ahead tonight. Stay with us.
Hey Google.
More than 100 billion words are translated every day.
Lift your hand.
Thank you very much for your help.
ご助力ありがとうございます。
Words about food. Words about friendship. About sport. About belief. About fear.
Oh my God.
Words that can hurt and sometimes divide. But every day, the most translated words in the world are how are you? Thank you. And I love you.
The CDC has been tracking cases of the brain-eating amoeba since 1962. In 1978, they established a free-living amoeba laboratory. According to their new report, quote, the lab increased the national capacity for clinical testing and contributed to an increase in the number of PAM cases in the United States. Now, PAM is just a fancy acronym that means Naegleria fowleri, which means the brain-eating amoeba. On July 30th, 1978, the New York Times published this article, quote, amoeba that kills swimmers puzzles medical world. The article continues, quote, It could be scientific fiction plot. Usually harmless organisms living in fresh water produce strain that attacks and kills swimmers by feasting on their brain cells. But it is not fiction. Scientists have discovered such a creature, an amoeba, that almost kills its victims, that almost always kills its victims. Quote, why some people swim in the water and are perfectly all right, and others swim in the same place and get sick, we don't know, said Dr. John Gullett, a specialist in infectious diseases at the University of California in San Francisco. Scientists studying the organism are puzzled by its potency, its erratic occurrences, and its resistance to drugs. The amoeba is usually associated with the sediment on the bottom of the warm man-made lakes, and sometimes with polluted areas. But it has also been found in cold springs and clean waters. Its latest confirmed casualty is a 14-year-old boy, Philip Eddy, who died on July 9th after swimming in a lake near here. The boy showed symptoms similar to those of the flu, several headache, nausea, and letharg 37.1. He was hospitalized, fell into a coma, and did not respond to drugs that had shown some promise in laboratory tests. End quote. So this disease continued killing people. In 2007, 6 young men died from the brain-eating amoeba while swimming in lakes and pools. Also in 2007, a 14-year-old named Angel Vasquez died after contracting the brain-eating amoeba from an apartment swimming pool in Orlando, Florida. In August of 2007, a 10-year-old Richard Almeida died from the brain-eating amoeba after swimming and wakeboarding at an Orlando water sports complex. This is a news report from 2016 about an 18-year-old girl who died from the brain-eating amoeba as well.
To the Index and news tonight about a rare and deadly infection. An 18-year-old girl from Ohio died from what's being described as a brain-eating amoeba. Health officials believe she became infected while visiting the National Whitewater Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. That amoeba, they say, entered through the nose likely while she was underwater. The CDC does report that a handful of such infections happen every year.
Once again, that was a news report from ABC News about the death of an 18-year-old girl who died from the brain-eating amoeba in 2016. In order to avoid contracting it, the CDC warns people about swimming in warm and fresh water, but if you do, please wear nose plugs because the amoeba enters through the nose. When people dive into warm or fresh water, the amoeba enters their body through the nose and then eats their brain tissue, which subsequently leads to death. Now, there is something important to note about this disease. You cannot be infected with it by drinking contaminated water. All it has to do is travel up your nose and eradicate your brain tissue, thenceforth the name, the brain-eating amoeba. Symptoms include fever, nausea, vomiting, stiff neck, seizures, altered mental status, hallucinations, and also a coma. Out of the 148 people who have contracted the brain-eating amoeba, reportedly, out of the 148 people who have contracted this deadly disease, only 4 people have survived here in the United States. Here's a news report from a 12-year-old survivor just 7 years ago.
12-year-old girl who beat the odds, just the 3rd person ever in North America to survive a rare brain infection.
Yeah, it's incredible. For 2 months, Kaylee Hardig has been battling this terrifying, nearly always fatal infection, and now she is speaking out for the first time.
Wow.
He's been wanting to see you anyway, so punch 3, 4.
It's a sight no one ever thought they'd see.
You're gonna do this stuff every day when you go home, right? No.
12-year-old Kaylee Hardig standing, smiling, and this morning for the first time, speaking about her dramatic brush with death.
I was so sick. Mama wouldn't leave the hospital at all. Mama was scared to leave me. She told me.
9 weeks ago, young Kaylee contracted a killer brain-eating infection at an Arkansas water park. There have only been 128 known infections like hers in the U.S. over the past 50 years, and miraculously, Kaylee is just the 3rd person to survive.
I can tell I've gotten better.
And even more miraculous, today she's going home.
Yeah, I'm ready to go home too.
What are your thoughts going to be when you get home? What's the first
Play
thing?
with Chloe, my dog Chloe. I have a little Yorkie. She's about 1, and I'm going to play with her and lay on my bed.
Kaylee has undergone intensive therapy.
3 more, you can do it.
And takes special medication flown in from Germany. But doctors say it was the speed with which her mother brought her to the hospital after being infected that made all the difference. Today, that quick-thinking mother says she couldn't be more relieved.
Can you remember what you said?
What?
The first time you spoke to me?
Mama. And Ma was ecstatic.
Now, with a renewed lease on life, Kaylee says with a big smile that she has even bigger plans.
I plan to become a hairstylist. New hair. Yeah, that's my dream.
It's so great. You know what? Her doctor says she will hopefully go back to school on Monday.
That's amazing.
For the first half of the day and then continue therapy in the second half of the day. So, I mean, she is a walking miracle. This doesn't happen. And her mom is the one to thank for this all.
And it's interesting, too. Doing this show, we start covering these stories as news stories. And now to see her come back, it's terrific.
That's great. That's great.
That was reporting from ABC News about a 12-year-old girl after surviving the brain-eating amoeba right after she contracted it. Just a remarkable story. Most recently, here in the United States, in Florida, there was a brain-eating amoeba outbreak in July of 2020. Then we covered here on this show about the brain-eating amoeba outbreak in Lake Jackson, Texas, that actually killed a 6-year-old boy. Well, now comes this. A new report from the CDC about the brain-eating amoeba, which indicates that it is spreading faster here in the United States. I've actually read the report, and I will admit I'm not a scientist, and the report is very perplexing. But essentially, this amoeba is spreading rapidly because of climate change. Zani Majid actually explains the report in layman's terms at republicworld.com. Quote, cases of Neglieri fowleri infection, a rare fatal brain-eating amoeba found in warm fresh water, have been expanding northward in the U.S. to Midwestern states, according to a report published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Of the 120 registered by CDC to date, at least 74 occurred in the southern states, 5 in West and 6 in Midwest, including Kansas, Minnesota, and Indiana. The brain-eating amoeba causes a fatal disease known as primary amoebic my apologies, I'm going to try to pronounce this word, meningoencephalitis, or otherwise known as PAM as an acronym. After the contaminated fresh water enters the nasal passages, causing acute brain infection, which results in death within 3 to 7 days from onset of symptoms. And then it goes on to say, quote, CDC's Free Living Amoeba Laboratory in recent years increased the clinical testing and found that the PAM cases reported in the U.S. have drastically increased with known exposure to infected recreational water such as outdoor aquatic venue, tap water, pond, reservoir, or a lake. According to Dr. Garper, epidemic who works for the Epidemic Intelligence Service officer in the... My apologies. So the Epidemic Intelligence Service is under the CDC. The article continues, quote, officer in the Waterborne Disease Prevention Branch, Division of Foodborne, Waterborne, and Environmental Diseases, says, quote, the rise in PAM cases in the Midwest region suggests northward expansion of Neglieri fowleri, which is the brain-eating amoeba. This could be attributed to the increase in outdoor aquatic venues in the United States, end quote. So once again, this new report from the CDC indicating that the brain-eating amoeba is heading north as a result of climate change. And that is definitely not good, which does say more on why we need to get a handle on climate change. But once again, this new CDC report by the CDC indicating that the brain-eating amoeba is spreading rapidly and it is heading north because of climate change. I'll make sure to leave that article, this new report, and this article in the description of this episode. Stay with us. The last note is next.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, Liz and I are going to do some work around the house. Do you know any good contractors?
I might.
Oh, that's great. Can you check their qualifications? Make sure they have great reviews and research the average price for the job. Oh, and book them on Wednesday. Actually, make it Friday.
When the water. You can't expect your neighbors to do everything Home Advisor can. So for a better way to get home projects done right, just ask Home Advisor.
Welcome back. William Cohen, a former Republican senator from Maine and also former defense secretary under President Bill Clinton, is now implying that the Republicans form a new party, calling Trump the, quote, ringmaster of the Republicans. This is reporting from Brooke Sipple at The Hill. Quote, William Cohen, a former Republican senator from Maine and defense secretary under former President Bill Clinton, blasted GOP lawmakers challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election in a Thursday interview in which he suggested the formation of a new political party. Cohen made the statements on CNN's The Situation Room while discussing Republican Senator Josh Hawley's plans to object during Congress's counting of the Electoral College vote on Wednesday, January 6th. Cohen called Hawley's actions, quote, shameful, but warned that the Republicans are just following President Trump's lead, calling him the party's, quote, ringmaster. Former GOP Senator William Cohen said, quote, we have to remember that the current occupant of the White House is a ringmaster, and what he expects to do is snap his whip and all the elephants hop on the chairs. What they have to understand is he is going to continue to snap the whip whether he's in office or out of office. And every time they're going to have to jump up and sit on that stool to satisfy him and his supporters. He is always going to up the ante. He can't be satisfied. There's nothing in him. There's no moral core. And so they are going to be extorted or bribed in order to avoid a primary in 2022 or 2024. End quote. Once again, and he also encourages them to stand up for the rule of law. All of this is just happening at once. Once again, a former Republican senator essentially implying that the party form a new party. Because the Republican Party is now being controlled by their new ringmaster, which is Donald Trump. With that said, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Jeremiah Patterson Show. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Remember to stay positive and inspired. Also wear your mask, and I will see you tomorrow.